And we'll go straight into the questions. We will still conclude around 9:30. If there are any unanswered questions remaining, we will put answers on our website from the panel. In 2005, the industry woke up to the fact that it was facing a major skill shortage issues within the next 5 to 10 years. We are now 8 years further on, and we don't seem to be any further forward. Indeed, we appear to be going backwards if you analyse the operating contractor dynamic that was being painted by Dave Stewart. Who would like to comment on that? Alix.
Well, I think that challenge is right. As I said in my presentation, this is not a new issue. It's been around as long as I've been around in the industry. It's certainly more acute because of the higher levels of activity, which it's a signal of our success, as well as some of the technical challenges that we have. I'm not sure if I'd agree with the contractor staff piece, because the figures that Dave quoted today were actually way ahead, much better than I remember when I was in the design world. So I think, there's, as I say, there's more energy. I think there's a stronger stand. There's definitely, if I could put it, a lot more independent thinking in the supply chain about tackling some of these really contentious issues. And but as I say, I think working together in collaboration is really the key to moving some of these forward.
Any other comments or observations on that particular point?
I didn't mention earlier that the work in Scotland has been mirrored by work in the UK, to give credit to the UK government, not something I'm probably supposed to do, but I think it's what you want is that we're working in the same direction broadly, and Gordon Ballard of Schlumberger is involved in the heading up the Oil and Gas Council with Michael Fallon, and it's taking forward this issue. So I think there is that sort of clear shared political direction I mentioned earlier, which is a help. But the first way to solve a problem is admit that there is one. And I think it seems to me that it's perhaps only relatively recently that there has been a sense of candour about this, and that's a good thing to solving the problem. Just the second point I wanted to make was to pick up something that Alix referred to, which is that there is a proposition that Scottish Enterprise are taking forward at my behest, which is to try and address the problem of the lack of bed space offshore, and therefore the lack of opportunity for people who haven't experienced the offshore working environment to gain that, and that is something that SE are looking at. And this arose from a discussion that I had with Dave Workman of Stork, with Bill Murray of the OCA, with Neil Gordon of Subsea and others about 6-9 months ago, to look at, can we have a facility with a decommissioned rig or part of a decommissioned rig near onshore, I think, because offshore would be just too expensive, as a centre of training excellence, perhaps somewhere in the Central Belt, designed to tackle this problem by addressing the fact that it's very difficult to provide that training offshore. Now, I'm aware that there are some facilities which provide this kind of training already, and I mention that there because the last thing we want to do is of duplication. But this is quite an exciting idea we're taking forward, and I mention it today because if it is to work, it will work as a business, not as a public sector initiative. And therefore, it would have to be something at the end of the day that you all think is worthwhile and some of you are prepared to invest in.
I think this partially answers the next question, but I'll ask it anyway. But when the IT sector had a critical skill shortage, the market was able to respond by enabling people in the wider workforce to upskill and cross-train themselves. Are there current initiatives to enable targeting talent pools to make themselves more employment? I think that's certainly one that you've mentioned, Fergus. But are there any other observations that anyone on the panel would like to make about that? Initiatives to target talent pools to make people more employable?
I'll try and address that in terms of some of the things we're doing in the Group PSN. We see a distinct shortage of things like project managers. So we're upskilling disciplined people, and we've just set up a project management academy to try and fill that skills gap. And we're also doing that in the design arena. So another area is is from offshore is certain niche positions like production control room operators. That's why we're talking to Shell about a production academy and using onshore facilities to train people in the control of oil and gas, as opposed to trying to find a solution to get them offshore. So we're doing our bit. It's not a silver bullet, but these are some of the initiatives we've got running internally.
Good. Hugo, would you have any observations?
Yeah, there are, as you said earlier, 20,000 service leavers every year coming from all three services, Army, Navy and Air Force. That's coming from a huge pool of staff, a resource, a human resource that works very much with synergies to the oil and gas industry. So we deliver missions on the ground with air assets and marine assets. The oil and gas industry works on the ground on platforms, as it were, with marine assets and air assets. So the human resource, the synergies and the training of the human resource are striking. We work more or less expeditionary. All of our operations we've been involved in through Iraq, Afghanistan, so we project expeditionary. We've a heavy reliance on logistics. The oil and gas industry is a heavy reliance on logistics, and we use technology to support that. So it's the synergies between what the services do and what the oil and gas industry and the energy sector do are striking. And we've 20,000 people leaving per year. What we're looking to do in the UK is become smarter about the way that we transit people out of regular service into civilian employment, and the way that we employ reservists in partnership with larger industry or smaller industries to ensure that their career is works both for the services and works for the civilian employer. So there are synergies there that we can work on and build on.
So, Alix,
I think as well, sometimes as an industry, we have a bit of memory loss, because in the early days of the industry, no one had oil and gas experience, and it was built on ex-military personnel, people from shipbuilding, mining, petrochemicals, steelworks, and we need to get that confidence in those sectors back and those resources back, and take off the blinkers that there are still some dinosaurs around, unfortunately, and we don't have cupboards full of 40-year-olds with 30 years experience. Those, that's just not going to happen ever.
Just moving on to the next question, a more controversial one, I think. When will the tax system be equalised to give staff a fair position against day rate contractors? So no pressure, Fergus.
I don't know why everybody thinks it's us, because I can pass the buck by saying that we don't have responsibility over the taxation system. But then, of course, I shouldn't pass the buck because we do want to have that responsibility. So I'm talking myself into a bit of a corner here. But I think the tax system is one of the issues where it encourages the use of contractors rather than employees, where it sort of penalises companies for taking on someone as an employee and provide that continuity. That's not really a good thing, is it? I don't pretend there's any simple or easy solutions to these things, but generally the more tax there is, the more payroll tax there is, the more employment is penalised, and that is not particularly a good thing. I'm not convinced, however, that is necessarily the sole reason why, as Dave said earlier, there is a preponderance of the use of contractors rather than employees. I think it's a factor. I wouldn't have thought it's the sole problem, but as far as tax is concerned, I think the bigger picture is that I very much hope that the industry now will go forward with predictability and certainty in tax and avoid the shocks, the 3 hikes that have been in tax over the past just over a decade. That I think is the bigger picture, and a recognition that tax and the success of the industry are inextricably linked, and the further development of brownfield allowances, decommissioning, these really are the big issues, and I think there's now a welcome recognition that is the case. But I've added another problem to the list of problems on the desk. Thank you very much for that.
Young trainees move around the industry often before they consolidate their training, which lead to companies losing interest in investing in them. Could we as an industry review indentured schemes where there is a commitment beyond training to both sides? So, how would you feel about an indentured training scheme? Do you think that has value, Dave? Alix?
Well, I think the issue is that, and I remember this from when I recruited graduates and set up graduate training schemes, it's quite complex, and there are some subtle things in there. I can see the attraction, I guess, of indentured schemes, but if we think that graduates coming out will then already, typically, if we look at engineers, for example, do a 3-year training program, so they've already made that commitment, and you're not going to get much of a commitment beyond that. And some companies can and have in the past put in clawback provisions, which is a possibility. But there are other things. It's about, I mean, part of it is the day rate culture, because I know our young engineers would see the Porsches in the car park and think, well, actually, that's a lot more important to me at the moment than a pension. So those kind of things. There were comments such as, and I can sympathise to some extent, our graduates would say, if I stay here, I'm always going to be thought of as Duncan, the graduate mechanical engineer, whatever, and they need to spread their wings, and they will often come back.
Mm-hmm. Dave, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if I could add to that, we normally spend quite a bit of time with our graduates getting feedback. We have regular lunches with them and kind of try and tease out what are the key issues that makes them leave, what are the key issues that would make them stay. And as Alix said there, one of the real things, apart from the day rate and the potential to earn a higher rate and perhaps a lower tax burden with immediate effect, is the need to be seen as always the graduate on that job. And we do a bad job, quite frankly, of moving them internally. So we're going to focus on refreshing that and actually insisting we move people internally onto more challenging prospects, so that the contract they sit in don't see them as the young apprentices, the guy we just get to mark up the P&IDs and really try and blossom the career. So and that's one of the reasons why we've introduced something like My Success Plan, where they can come to us as opposed to wait for a year to have a conversation, as enable that. There is no silver bullet. Going back to the sort of the kind of IR35 and the tax incentive issue. I mean, that's an interesting dynamic. The reason we would pay high rates and there would be some tax advantage is normally for low utilisation. But in the principles of IR35, we've got examples, and we all do of people sat in the same desk for the last 20 years with each Porsche in the car park, and 100% utilisation, just like a staff member. So there's some of the cultural things we need to unlock to change that dynamic.
Fergus.
With regard to the question about indentures there, Robert, I should make it clear that the apprenticeship scheme that the Scottish Government have been running in Scotland is not a scheme where employers have no obligations. It is a scheme where there's a clear commitment to the apprentice to provide a proper training, and that's a good thing. And the financial assistance that goes with that only goes with that if there is a proper training over, I think, a couple of years. And that's a good thing. I also wanted to say that Sir Ian Wood, of course, is conducting at the behest of the UK Government a review into the oil and gas industry's future as a whole. But he's also kindly agreed to chair a youth in Scotland, a youth development workforce commission. And I heard him speak in this last week, and he's pursuing it with the determination and passion that you would expect. There are far too many children, as he pointed out last week in Scotland, who are waking up thinking that the world isn't interested in them. And therefore, I think the industry has got an obligation, as has been mentioned, I think, by Alix, to look at what more you can do. Let's be quite candid about it. I know that many of you already rise to this, and sometimes it's the smaller or medium-sized enterprises that are taking on most apprentices, or at least proportionately more. I met Ace Winches from Turriff in Houston, as it happens, and they take on a huge number of apprentices, albeit no, not a, an enormous company, although very, very successful. So I think there's more that we need to do for young people. And the last thing I would say is that there are imaginative ideas taking place. David Curry of FMC is, I think, seeking to persuade Dunfermline Secondary School to offer courses to 6-year students in things like project management, so they learn about it at school. That seems to me to be an imaginative and sensible idea. Why shouldn't a child just about to leave school have the chance to do a course in that? I hope that these are ideas that we can work on together as we go ahead into the future.
And of course, I mean, this leads into another question. Half the potential future workforce are female. What initiatives exist to attract women into our industry? Not necessarily working offshore, because there's lots of great onshore jobs in our industry too. Who would like to say a few words on that? Alix.
As the token woman. Not enough is the short answer, and that's certainly on our radar to look at. I think one of the things I didn't say earlier, but I think the Minister alluded to, is that before you can solve a problem, you really need to understand it. One of the things, interestingly, that really polarises our membership, it's a real Marmite issue, is the issue of women's networks and women's groups. So that's been a bit of an eye-opener. But what I'd like to see, and we've talked a little bit with Peter about this, is some really quality research as to understanding what are the obstacles to women following a career, or indeed staying in a career in the industry, and at what point do we need to reach them? I mean, we absolutely understand that we need in schools to make sure that they're included and encouraged to do the right subjects, to give them the choices. It's little consolation, but I would say it's not something that's unique to ourselves, but other industries and sectors, including the military, have done a lot of work actually to increase the number of women in the workforce. So there are people out there we can learn from. So not enough, as I say, is the short answer, and it's something that we're very conscious of.
Yeah, this sort of leads on to another question. I mean, this one's about teachers and parents being most likely to influence children at a young age. Is the Green campaign still biasing career choices away from the oil and gas industry? Fergus, Alix, Dave?
Well, I certainly hope not, although I suspect in some cases it may still be. But, I mean, in respect that the oil and gas industry now seeks to recover more of the reserves from all fields and steward a scarce, finite resource more effectively by recovering more of it before going on to the next field. It is looking after a finite resource in a way that we would all recognise as consistent with green principles. So in that respect, as Trevor Garlick once put it, we want to take away more than we leave behind. That is a point that I think needs to be made a bit more. But the main thing, I think, is to show what a great career there is for young people, that it can be exciting, you can see much of the world, you can make a good living, even if Dave here hasn't yet got his Aston Martin or Porsche. You can make a good living. I think the median earnings is £80,000. They can't say that about many industries. It's an industry people can be proud to be in. So I think we're overcoming these perceptions, but you're right. I think the questioner's right. There's probably more work to be done to dispel some of the more sort of lurid extreme smears that sometimes the industry is accused of.
Yeah, I'll just give Hugo an opportunity to speak, because what do you see reservists being able to bring to the party in this industry?
Well, reservists come in all kind of shapes and sizes. I'm a reservist. Okay, I'm the Deputy Commander of the Army in Scotland. I run a power engineering company in Union Street. So this afternoon I'll go and talk to, I don't know who it's TACA or Enquest, one of the two. So we have a foot in both camps. I've had 30 years in the reserve service. I've had 18 years in Scottish Power in the electricity supply industry. The rest of my working career has been in oil and gas in Nigeria and in the UK. So what we bring is the competencies, or we cross-fertilise the competencies from our civilian career, our military career, and bring them together. where the UK forces or UK PLC, the direction of travel at the moment is that we will have more reservists within the UK and less regular forces. So the regular force will come down to 82,000. We'll have 30,000 reservists. So we'll have a different shape. We'll have an integrated army, which looks a lot different than it does now. The Air Force and the Navy will be exactly the same. So in the very near future, and this idea has got real traction now politically and socially, is that we will have career partnering where people, for example, the head of the human resources, just to take an example, head of human resources in the Army has probably had no human resources training whatsoever. So the head engineer in the Army is the head engineer, has done little engineering outside the Army other than possibly 1 or 2 years placement in a company early in his career. So what we're looking to do now within the reservists and the regular forces is to get smarter about the way we train people from day one. So when we're taking someone in at 16 years old and putting them on our apprenticeship schemes, then we're looking at where they will be in 22 years' time. At the moment, the horizon for someone leaving the services is 3 years. About 2 years ago, it was about 2 weeks. So, we're getting much, much smarter about how we transit people, how we take people from the services and back into civilian career. Well, the next step in that, the next logical step, is to go right back to the start and say, okay, you're joining the services, but you'll only be here for 22 years maximum. Let's look at where you can be outside the services once you leave, and how that supports UK industry in the future. So how we take those, we work with systems approach to training. Systems approach to training in the UK oil and gas industry is called competency-based training. Is exactly the same thing. So this mapping process will look at the competencies. We will look at them early on for people coming into services, and we'll look at what happens when they leave and how that supports industry. And in order to do that, what we will do is, through people's career, we'll give them the opportunity to say, okay, you're involved in engineering, for example. Okay, we're going to put you out to BAE Systems for 3 years, to the Wood Group PSN for 2 years or whatever, so that they bring those competencies back in, and that cross-fertilisation ends up with results in a workforce that supports both UK defence, UK industry, and people who have a life after after the defence career.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have to close it all there. We still have a few questions. I'll put answers to these questions on our website later on after talking to the panellists. I'd like to thank the panellists, Hugo, Alix, Dave, Fergus, for their contribution today. I'd like to thank AGR for sponsoring this event. There's information about some forthcoming events on the screens now. There's also a feedback form on your table, so please provide us with feedback because it does help us move things forward for future events. But I'd just like to finally just thank the panel for their contributions today.